Hello to Global Chit Chat, our weekly show where we talk about issues related to global politics, geopolitics, and of course many other matters. And joining me always on this show is Tridivesh. Welcome Tridivesh again to Global Chit Chat.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So, Tridivesh, starting off, China is the biggest issue as of now in terms of global politics, and so the zero COVID policy of China, it has basically backfired on their faces. We have seen mass protest in major cities like Shanghai. So, first of all, I just want to get your point of view. What do you see, in fact, that how has this policy of China backfired on them?
You see, this now the protests have come up. I mean, these recent protests, obviously, they have drawn a lot of attention. But something has been brewing for a while, actually, because a number of things have happened together. Because you had, first of all, the slowdown, which has been there over the past couple of years. It's not only due to COVID; it is also due to some of Xi Jinping's economic policies. Now, he did not expect that on top of obviously the one was the cost corrections which he wanted to make to the real estate sector and so on. From his side, making real estate more affordable, reducing the disparities. That was part of his vision. Now, what has also happened alongside is obviously you've had these very stringent lockdowns, which have had an impact, which have taken their toll, no doubt, on the economy. But people have begun to resent them because there has been a rise in unemployment. There has been, if you look at the industrial production again, uh, last year there was a glimmer of hope, but again now the industrial production has dipped between January and October of this year. So, and apart from the economic issues, people are obviously feeling that they're feeling that the rights are being cut. Obviously, I mean we know that China is not democracy or whatever, but you know. Uh, the, Xi Jinping's predecessors had tried to give a certain amount of freedom, and also, uh, the policy which was followed was called as consultative Leninism, right? That you so you basically you have more of consensus, some consensus building, and you're also responsive to the demands of now. To be fair, with regards to the environment, with regard to economic inequalities, etc., initially Xi Jinping's vision sought to address what he thought were some of the major issues. But this is obviously, along with COVID-19, this has obviously not, because nobody, I mean, the world, it's not just China, the world over, you cannot have one COVID-19. You have to keep on adapting to the situation. Now, what is the problem which China faces? As I said, one is the slowdown because of some of the policies. One is, last year, if you notice, there were power cuts, due to coal shortage. That is to achieve some of the climate change goals, some of the change commitments that have been made. Then, obviously, as a result of the zero COVID, uh, the domestic supply chains have been disturbed. So all that has happened. But it was expected that from the end of last year, some cost correction would be made. And in fact, recently also, uh, if you look at some support had been given to the real estate sector, to small scale industries, and because there is a bit of a difference even within uh, the administration. There are those who are taking the slowdown in economic growth very seriously. But obviously, Xi Jinping has made a change, and his new team would be people who are absolutely on the same page, even as far as economic policies are concerned. But there was this issue was flagged that if on top of everything else you have slow economic growth, you have joblessness, it is not good. There is going to be social resentment. Now, we have seen one example of which you pointed out. So it's a combination of factors. That's what it's not only COVID-19. It's multiple factors. Now, the problem, the catch 22 is that, because of these strict sort of regulations with regard to COVID, there is no real I mean, if you look at the level of, there's no collective herd immunity or whatever. That is not developed at all. So if you open up suddenly, as has been happening now, you try to open up a little bit the disease. There's a worry then that there'll be pressure on the public health systems. Unlike other countries which would open up, I mean, there was obviously in every country there were problems. This is something which it's a crisis for the whole of humanity as such. Especially if you look at, for instance, if you look at Asia, if you look at India, 2021, there were, but over a period of time, there was herd immunity, and even there is also skepticism with regard to vaccination also. So,
Correct.
there are multiple factors. So this is the part about COVID. Now, if these restrictions are in place, obviously it is going to take a toll on the domestic economy, as I have said. Whether if you look at some of the figures, and interestingly, it's for the first time in 30 years that some of the developing countries in Asia, especially ASEAN countries, will be growing faster than China. They are going to be driving growth. So that is the level of, I mean, as it is. See, one was a controlled slowdown, which was intended for course corrections. The other is what has happened as a result of now. Even if you want to reach, if China wants to reach that 5.5% this year, it is not. I think it's going to be below 4. The estimates are lower than that of all the international organizations. So this is the domestic part. Then globally, obviously, I mean, you have obviously China has been a favored destination for numerous countries
Correct.
world over. I mean, obviously, it was for manufacturing and so on. So now that change, one Western companies, as it is after these lockdowns, they had begun to think of finding, because they are not used to these sort of restrictions, and that is one part. Then the supply chains. So if you look at the restrictions, what the protest happened, for instance, at a Foxconn facility.
Exactly.
So that is the other part. Now, obviously, it's happened in such a place. That's why there is so much, attention which it has got. And in fact, uh, at one of the places where there was a protest, BBC accredited journalist was also detained for several hours. That is, we'll be discussing that in the context of that. Only the British PM actually spoke about the rising. So so that is a domestic part. Now, globally, obviously, the supply chains get impacted. Even though countries are looking to reduce their dependence upon China, it's not realistic. Even countries which have strained ties know that all of a sudden, and it really doesn't make sense. You can reduce your dependence to some extent, but you can't totally, if you are talking about maintaining a global order and you want China and Russia and all to, you can't totally dismantle and, disrupt the globe, because it's businesses which know, how it impacts them, these sorts of disruptions. So that's not possible. But in the short run, I think so if you look at things like gadgets, mobile phones, obviously, in the short run, if things continue the way they are, there will be major disruptions. Even another, and then if this also reaches the ports, if these restrictions, if there's a spread and there are restrictions, there's the uh, further clamp down, and that will further disrupt the sort of supply chain, the global. So that is, and as it is, you can see that if you look at, so you see the difference. The day Biden and Xi, they met on the sidelines of the G20. That day,
Right.
the stock markets globally responded positively. Chinese companies listed in the US, they shot. I mean, they really, that day there was sudden shoot up. If you look at some of the shares, the stocks like Alibaba and all, and now if you look at what has happened after these protests, it's had an impact on obviously the stock market in Hong Kong, Europe, globally there has been an impact. So this is, I mean, however much you may want to say that you want to diversify, you want to look at a separate supply chain, you look at that happens in the long run. In the short run, you cannot dealing with this disruption is not easy, and it is for this reason that in many countries where there are strains and ties, the business community adopts a more cautious approach. In fact, even when Trump had imposed the tariffs, at that point of time, a number of US businesses had said to adopt a more nuanced approach. And now, of course, the US itself and after the Biden-Xi meeting, there was also hope, as it is, that because US said that it does not want a Cold War sort of mentality. China said it doesn't want to challenge the existing order, right? So they had, so that was positive, but this is now. This will have ramifications if there's a spread. And I may just also add as an aside that you see what happens is now travel has opened up. So you have and while China is very restrictive, I mean, in terms of their own national staff, people from other countries are traveling there, and Indians also travel globally. So I'm just giving an example in India, even other countries. So if you have people, for instance, from Southeast Asia going to, there's a spread over there, and it comes back to Southeast Asia, and you have, let's say, Indians, you have your people from Europe, you have people from other countries traveling. So there is that worry also because of this herd
Right.
not having come up. If a new variant comes up, because I mean, obviously there is no real, you cannot really predict whether it's with Africa, whether it's some other part. You can't really say. I mean, it's very wrong to also label any one country that way. But you are interlinked. So not allowing, so the two things, not one, not allowing the herd immunity to develop, and second, obviously, if your rate of vaccination is not enough, is not sufficient, it's problematic. And that then a new variant comes up, then everybody's interlinked. You can't forever shut the borders. There is travel. So that is another problem, which may, in the short run, in the immediate short run, it may not happen, but in the sort of near medium run, medium term, this is another worry also. So I think this is um, um, the global worry is also about the fact that there is no herd immunity there, because as I said, travel is, for instance, you may not directly travel to China, but
And of
you,
course, Tridivesh, just a few days ago, China actually opened up its travel policy to more than 25 countries, including India, also saying that there would be a laxation in the, quarantine. Definitely, I think that at that point, where you're putting up this thing is like the travel is very important for even for the business and the economy. Travel is much more important. So if China keeps on doing the same thing, not allowing the herd immunity to come in, then of course there would be a lot of issue in terms of people accepting and going to into China and investing into it. And of course, when we talk about the global economy also here, we had this conversation, right? You just happily put when Xi and Biden met on the sidelines of the G20 summit. So there was a definitely sudden spike, but now as pictures are coming out of Beijing, out of the story about the BBC journalist being detained while he was covering. So what kind of a message economically also China is, China not trying, but what message is it sending to the world? That is China actually open for global economy, or is it like going to be the same thing?
you see, an attempt was made by both Washington and Beijing to say that that they'll handle this sort of competition, that basically you have to coexist, and there will be competition, but you'll prevent the competition from turning into conflict. Now the problem is that at this point of time you have the sort of leadership which you have in China. As I had said earlier, from Deng Xiaoping onwards, you had a certain amount of opening up. I mean, basically, China has benefited the most when it opened up, even economically itself. And obviously, today, all these experiments which are being carried out, whether you want to make a course correction, that is because you reach a certain level. And that was all because of opening up. Now, Xi Jinping's style of leadership, earlier also in earlier shows we've discussed, obviously, he believes he's his own man. But he has more of Mao and less of Deng.
Right.
Right. So now that is, and there are, frankly, there are other leaders in the, I mean, there are, even the Chinese premier himself was very skeptical about the economic policies, and there are supposed to be differences. There are others also who are reformists who believe in, an open economy. Probably in private, they would also be flagging the lacunae of these, of this zero COVID policy and so on and so forth. But so things don't come out obviously in the open. But this style of leadership, not forget the the global politics or whatever, even domestically, there are there are limitations to this. So for instance, it was believed that people would fall in line, uh, for very. I mean, because some of the zero COVID policies were very repressive. Certain things have started come. I mean, after this protest, obviously more attention has been drawn. But for 6, 7, 8 months, there has been, it has been coming out that how even women had to go through hardships. Uh, so, many things. Now, uh, there's a limitation. There are limitations to this at a certain point. And in fact, there was a this worry has also been expressed even before COVID also, that that so far what has been see so far people have seen high rates of growth. They have been used to a particular style of life, so they have not really questioned the political system. Now whatever anybody, I mean, whatever the skeptics about China may say, or whatever those who within China who defend this model may say, the fact is the new generation, a lot of them have exposure to the West. They've been to free societies, they've seen how it works, they've been to US campuses, they've seen UK, all that. So there's obviously a change of mindset, there's an exchange of ideas. And while yes, a lot of people criticize, the that Kissinger's approach towards China has failed. Also, that Bill Clinton had also said that once China opens up economically, automatically it'll also have to, accept global ideas, and so there'll be no. So there's a criticism even of that. But to some extent, uh, if one sees the recent developments, that is true. You cannot totally sort of be dismissive of that. And obviously, I think it is in the interest of the global order that the West and other countries adopt a nuanced approach towards China, and also understand the fault lines within China without getting into disturbing or whatever. I mean, so that otherwise there's always this thing of Western conspiracies and so on and so. But it's a lot of people don't understand the nuances and the fault lines within China. That is, and even the now after seeing Xi Jinping, probably there's a realization that how there's a change in the style of leadership, and how say Deng Xiaoping was very different. But there are a lot of people who think that the style of leadership is it's monolithic. That is something which even outsiders need to understand that it's not true.
True, true, Devesh. And now, like, let's turn our focus a little bit away from China and towards the West, as we're talking about the West. And very interesting developments coming in from both UK and from Canada, as after meeting Xi in G20 summit, Canada has now shift their focus more towards the Indo-Pacific, and saying that they are going to invest billions and billions of dollars into the Indo-Pacific region. And same with Britain. So the new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said that China is not that close of an ally to the Britain as it was a few years ago. So why this sudden shift of two bigger Western countries from China towards the Indo-Pacific region?
So post the pandemic, and post the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong, all Western countries have reacted very strong. So Australia reacted very strongly to. I mean, Australia is not geographically a Western country, but it's very much part of that. So uh, when it asked for an inquiry into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously China reacted strongly, right? Uh, and then you have after that, UK has also, after the imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong, there was a deterioration in UK-China ties, and Canada since 2018. After it first Canada detained a senior functionary of Huawei, and then after that, uh, uh, China detained two Canadian nationals on allegation. The allegation was that they're spying, that they were both spies or whatever. They were released last year, but ties are basically So there's a clear pattern towards how there's been a deterioration. The first thing is that earlier, even in the case of the US, things like areas like education were not impacted. Now, since 2000, since the Trump administration, greater attention began to be paid to what is happening in the Confucius Institutes, which are supposed to teach Mandarin, which are supposed to increase awareness about China, and so on and so forth. So there was interference. That is uh, the allegation, whether it's US, whether it's Australia, whether it's UK, all over, and even in Europe. That was one thing. Second was that it started off with the US that Chinese students, some of them get access to sensitive uh, technology, and that they, so that is why regulations have been whereby, so, the visa regime has been changed so as to ensure that Chinese nationals don't get, so not too many of them enroll in STEM courses where they can get access to sensitive technologies. That was, so even areas like education were impacted. Then you had political interference that this happened in Australia. Now recently, if you look at Canada, the main reason for this is the accusation that China is meddling in the domestic politics of Canada. So there is a, even in UK, there have been allegations. So there's a very clear, trajectory. And now areas like higher education, or I mean, I'll come to the Indo-Pacific, but even areas like higher education, people-to-people contact. Then even if you look at the, obviously, if you look at foreign direct investment, all these countries are trying to ensure. Now, if you look at Canada, it's trying to ensure that Chinese state enterprises don't invest in sensitive areas which are linked to national security, to the Canadian national security. So this is how, since about, because pre-COVID there were certain areas which are not impacted, and US allies also, they knew that they sort of struck a balance between China and they have totally moved towards the US in terms of the approach towards China. There is 100 total convergence virtually on how to deal with China. This happened also about on the issue of Huawei, whether Huawei should be on the this 5G technology. It started off from there, but then COVID-19 and all that. Now, if you look at the remarks of first of all, if we take the British Prime Minister, essentially he has he said that the UK China relationship, I mean, we are far away now from the golden era. That is a remark which a former Conservative PM David Cameron had made actually about the British China, about the UK China relationship. And obviously, during his speech, during his address, this very address, he also spoke about the Indo-Pacific. Now, he did not outline specifically his vision for the Indo-Pacific, but basically the China threat, and now if you look at the Indo-Pacific vision of Canada and the speech of the UK PM, so for instance, Canada has called China a disruptive power, right? UK here, where, and also said that China has basically benefited from the current world order and is trying to dismantle that very world order. And
Correct.
similarly, Rishi Sunak has said that China poses a threat to our values, right? And obviously this, so Rishi Sunak's address also happens at a time when a British journalist was detained. So
Right.
so there are very clear. I mean, if you look at the Rishi Sunak speech, if you look at the the Canadian vision for the Indo-Pacific, now the budget is not much. The budget which has been allocated is less than 2 billion US dollars, the equivalent of that. But obviously, it seeks, and Canada has been trying to diversify because Canada is also part of CPTPP. So as it is with many of the Indo-Pacific countries, the economic ties have benefited. Now, this, according to this vision, obviously is going to benefit, strengthen security and economic ties with East Asian countries, with ASEAN. Uh, and earlier also, many Canadian provinces, they had their representative offices also. In fact, even in, and obviously Canada has very close people-to-people ties with India, so that is already there. But what it's seeking to do is it's seeking to further, reduce its economic dependence upon China. Whether you look at the trade, whether you look at foreign direct investment, and some of this has already begun to happen, as I said, under the CPTPP. But it wants to do more in a more structured manner, and very similar to what whether it's UK, which is part of the, which is, if you look at Rishi Sunak, he's also spoken about the FTA, with with India, uh, which he says will be negotiated very soon. I mean, then similarly, an FD in progress with Indonesia, and then
Right.
also about the CP. He's also referred to the So the pattern is pretty much similar. That you look for, you look for either you are very proactive within the free and open Indo-Pacific vision, or you're part of the CP. Mostly, so Australia, Canada, UK, they're all obviously looking to benefit from the CPTPP, right? And Australia is an important player already within the CPTPP. Australia also, the Australian Parliament also just gave its approval for the India-Australia FTA. So this basically lesser dependence upon China. Not all of a sudden, obviously, it has to, as I said, it can only be done incrementally. It can be done in certain areas, and probably more attention to East Asia, ASEAN, India. That is one thing. Then where the Canadian approach of towards the Indo-Pacific is different is that not you see the problem, for instance, between India and Australia or India and UK often comes on people-to-people issues,
Hmm.
on student visas, tourist visas. In Canada, that's not an issue because Canada is actually looking. I mean, if you look at the student of late, there have been more rejections, but still look at the tourist visas, if you look at student visas, and that is, and this clearly mentions that. And this is a very interesting part that because you see, the free and open Indo-Pacific also has to have a strong people-to-people component, and so none of the if you look at the Quad members per se, none of them has really spoken about that aspect. So that is an issue which India has with Australia, to some extent with the US. So Canada addresses that, not only vis-a-vis India, even other countries within. So it's spoken about Manila. It's referred to Manila, Chandigarh, Delhi. Their so for instance the High Commission in Delhi, the consulates in Chandigarh, right, and things like now. And then so you have a mention about how your how it will increase its security presence, uh, security cooperation will increase, and then the large thrust is about China. But again,
Right.
so for instance, calling China disruptive power, how it threatens, you know, uh, like UK said, how it threatens how it threatens the Canadian way of life, how Canada's belief in pluralism, freedom, and so on and so forth. And this was the very point which Justin Trudeau also made in his, if you that clip which is being referred to, in that Trudeau said that that Canada is a transparent society, and there will be differences with China, but we would want to sort of work them out, right? Now, this at this point of time, it really depends. As I said, I mean, the for a more uh, stable world order, it all
Hmm.
boils down to ultimately now how Xi Jinping, uh, what approach does he take? And as we had discussed, one is the domestic issues. The other is even on global issues. Is it just grandstanding and rhetoric, or is he, or are if you look at the recent meetings and his recent speeches, does he is he actually serious about all that? So a lot will depend upon that. Now, normally what happens is that if a leader faces domestic problems, it can go both ways. He can become
Right.
more aggressive on foreign policy, or he can take a more nuanced stance on foreign policy because that can give him some space. For instance, the economic realm, you know. So that is it. It really depends upon which direction he moves in. As far as this is the Indo-Pacific vision is concerned, or the references to the Indo-Pacific, it's also very clear that these countries have all said that obviously we need to work with China and certain. So, for instance, all Western countries have said in areas like climate change, you have to work with China. Similarly, on certain other issues of global importance, you have to work with China. There is no way out. And even Rishi Sunak also said that he wants to avoid a cold war. So that is after Biden, a leader of another Western nation, saying that he wants to avoid a cold war like situation with China. So obviously
Right.
there has to be a fine balance. So at this point of time, I think the global situation is very complex, and over the next year or so, with the US presidential elections and the challenge of COVID is still, I mean, COVID-19, uh, the talk of a global recession, I think these challenges are only likely to increase.
Correct. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Sri Devesh, for joining me on Global Chit Chat and sharing your insight about the problems in China, and also, of course, how the world is viewing China and its policy when it comes to Indo-Pacific. Well, on that note, thank you very much, and thank you viewers for joining me and Sri Devesh on Global Chit Chat. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to One India News if you like this content. And thank you very much, Sri Devesh, once again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.